Welcome to Panther Potpourri, the podcast where we're supposed to talk Panthers hockey, but sometimes we don't. Presented by Florida Hockey Now. Here are your hosts, Jacob Langsom, Alex Lopez, and TJ Peterson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Panther Potpourri, a Florida Hockey Now podcast. I am your host, Jacob Langsam. Here with me, as always, is my co-host, Alex Lopez. And joining us today, a very special guest to preview the Florida Panthers versus Toronto Maple Leafs second-round series from The Athletic, the one and only Dom Luszczyszyn. Dom, how you doing today?
I am doing great. A major feeling of relief after last night.
How nervous were you when it was 2-2?
It definitely had a feeling of like, here we go again. Because for like most of the series, I was the least nervous I've ever been. I definitely talked a bit of shit on Twitter, and I think some Sens fans misconstrued that as I don't even know how they like there's some people thought like I was complaining about stuff. And the first three games, I genuinely I haven't had that much fun watching Leafs playoff hockey in a while because I did not take that team seriously. To be honest,
I still don't take that team seriously.
Yeah, I think they will be good one day.
Yeah.
I don't think the way they play and the talent they have is enough to be more than a wild card team right now. And I think there's definitely levels to teams. And when the Panthers made it as a wild card team, they were kind of like a fake wild card team. Like you could see like under the hood,
Right,
that this was a team that won the President's Trophy the year before. And they had a lot of talent and just things weren't going together. They looked like a sleeping giant. The Sens just looked like a very normal seventh seed. And I wasn't that impressed with them this season, and I wasn't that impressed with them through the first three games, despite all the media seeming to believe that they controlled the series from the perimeter.
You always hear, especially in the NHL, just get into the playoffs and anything can happen. And there's two types of teams that applies to. There's teams like you just talked about, the Panthers, who are an eighth seed and no one really understands why based on their underlying numbers, the talent on the team. And it's just like all this team needs to do is finally put it together and they can do anything. And that's exactly what we saw the Panthers do 2 seasons ago. And then you have the Ottawas and the Montreals of the world where you're just kind of using it as hopium to be like, oh, all we got to do is get in. And, once every 25 or so years, you get a, Montreal Cinderella type run to the finals that makes absolutely no sense. But that didn't happen this year. The Ottawa Senators, they made a game of it, but they're gone in 6 and it probably should have been 4.
It should have been 4. Game 5, I think, was the Leafs' only truly bad game. I'm gonna drop a metaphor on you guys, possibly an allegory. I don't know what you want to describe it as, but when you were saying just get in, it reminded me of a movie that features Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, and Matthew Tkachuk. It is called Ratatouille, and the central premise of this movie is anyone can cook, right?
right.
And so it's the same exact idea. Anyone can be a Stanley Cup champion. You just have to get in. Anyone can cook. And it's at the end of the movie where the food critic realizes what that actually means. And it's not that anyone can cook. It's that a great cook can come from anywhere. So it's not that anyone can win the Stanley Cup. It's that a contender can be anywhere from 1 to 8, if that's just the way it breaks sometimes, which is what we got with that Panthers team when they were a wildcard team. It's what we got with the Kings when they won in 2012. Those were teams that genuinely looked like a contender. They just weren't getting the results that they deserved during the season. That's not what Ottawa was.
Yeah, I always think about that Blues team that was last in the league on January 1st that then went on to win the Cup.
And even them looking back, before the season, people had high expectations for them.
Right.
Their underlying numbers after Montgomery was hired were unbelievably good. And they had Pietrangelo, O'Reilly, Tarasenko, Parayko. They had a core, and they now had a goalie with Binnington. That is a team where they have the ingredients, and little Remy can make a meal out of that.
And I know we kind of said we were going to say this to the end, but I want to do it now just because you segued perfectly into it, Dom. Um, Coach of the Year finalist, Jim Montgomery is not one of them, when to me he should be the winner far and away.
The Coach of the Year award is the holy shit, you surprised us. We thought you'd be
Right.
terrible, but you're actually good. And that seems to be the basis for how we decide whether a coach did something. And I don't think there's ever been a better story to that end than Montgomery taking a Blues team that like genuinely looked like they needed to tear it down and rebuild and like start doing something different. He went in and said, "No, we're fine. We're good. We're gonna get back into the postseason here. We're gonna rip off a 140 point pace for like 30 games or whatever. We're gonna turn Robert Thomas into a Canadian superstar. We're gonna turn Cam Fowler back into a top pairing defenseman." He was pure magic this
Yep.
year. I don't know how exactly he turned specifically that blue line around, because that was the big question going into the year is how is this team going to be any good with that blue line? And it turns out that blue line just needed some Jim Montgomery teachings to get there.
Yeah. So the defense is actually a good segue into the actual round 2 matchup here. You know, we all love waxing poetic about the heroes and mysteries of playoffs past, but we are currently in playoffs present. The Leafs and Panthers are no strangers to each other. Uh, Obviously, division rivals to some extent. They play each other a lot during the regular season. A recent and fairly contentious playoff matchup that saw the Panthers winning that series. Dom, what do you see in the matchup coming up here that differentiates it from that matchup just a couple of years ago, or do you think this is something that's kind of set up where the identities of the teams are similar enough where you might see kind of a similar flow to the series here?
I think in general, the Leafs have seen how the Panthers have turned things around, especially from the team they used to be that was heavy on the rush game and rebuilt into this heavy fork check team. I think the Leafs have tried to emulate that a lot of the last couple of years. So I think the identities are similar and also the roster construction as well. We just wrote our preview for this series, and I think it's a bit striking how sort of evenly matched the teams are at the top of the lineup. Like you have the big three on each side, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and then
Yeah.
Reinhart, Barkov, Kachuk. Two of those guys are two-way studs. One of them is a pure offensive force playing secondary matchup. So we got that. We got some next level weapons. We got Tavares and Nyes on the Leafs, Marchand, Bennett for Hagee, whatever on Panthers, whichever the two you want to pick. And then for both teams, I think you have a very solid top four. The big difference is that the Panthers have a true number one in Gustav Forsling, and the
Yeah.
Leafs do not. So I think Tanev is maybe a little better defensively than Forsling, but one of the things that separates Forsling, and I think this is present in like the best shutdown defense in the league, is with being the best, better defenders in the league, he doesn't sacrifice any offense to get there. He's still driving offense. They're still creating in the offensive zone, and he doesn't make life difficult for his forwards. Whereas Tanev is probably not an ideal offensive player from the blue line. So when you have Matthews and Marner out with him, it's not as easy as if they have Riley instead. And that's the sort of the sacrifice the Leafs have had to make without a number one defenseman. But after Tanev, that they at least look a lot more solid this year, and they can go, I think, toe to toe with the Panthers in terms of their defenseman after Forsling. The issue for the Leafs is after Matthew Nyes, all of their forwards are not that good. And the Panthers have a loaded top nine.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the true difference in this series and where Toronto definitely falls short, because if Matthews and Marner get canceled out by Reinhart and Barkov, like they're probably toast. They need Matthews and Marner to like outplay Reinhart and Barkov enough that the depth advantage doesn't matter, and that is probably one of the hardest asks you can have in this sport.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the thing the Panthers have in any playoff series they get into, regardless of whether it's Toronto or anyone else in the NHL, is that you have to win the matchup against the Panthers top line, because you're almost certainly going to lose the matchup against the depth. Because if you look at the Panthers, who they're scratching as their fifth line, that's good enough to be a fourth line for most of the
Mhm.
A
teams in the
lot of
NHL.
teams, right?
And that's
Yeah.
exactly what they just did to Tampa, is that they can run four lines and just wear you down and if the series goes long, which the Tampa series didn't, you're just out of legs. And it's what the Panthers did to the Oilers in the Cup final last year. It was, you saw it in Game 7. McDavid and Draisaitl were
Mhm.
absolutely gassed,
Totally
and
gassed.
that's the exact thing that the Panthers are going to be able to do to Toronto, in my opinion, is that, Barkov is going to play his matchup to a draw or a slight win, and then as long as you get expected results down the lineup, it just keeps stacking in favor of the Panthers.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think one of the differences with that is McDavid and Draisaitl had to play like 25 minutes every
Right.
series. And I think the Leafs top guys, because this is just a second round, because they weren't really exerted as much against the Sens, they will probably get a fresher Matthews and Marner.
That's an excellent point.
Like I understand you guys are from Florida and you're used to Barkov winning every single matchup. Against the Leafs in 2023, I think that's correct. They
Yeah.
played to a draw. I don't think either line scored when they're out there against each other.
I remember that being right. I
Yeah,
remember talking about that after that series.
yeah,
Yeah, because Reinhardt did a lot of damage in that series, and he wasn't playing with Barkov at the time.
Right.
He was with
yeah.
Lundell and
Lundell
Serrano.
and that too.
yeah. But in the regular season, I think in the last 3 years, Matthews is up 5-1 in goals against Barkov. Sean Gentili wrote that section. I'm pretty sure he did some very strong research there. You guys can double check, but I don't know the exact time frame. It'll be in the preview tomorrow. But Matthews has outscored Barkov, I think 5-1 over the last 3 years, something along those lines. And if that happens in this series, I think we have a series.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that is what needs to happen. My Leafs fan copium is that Matthews has not finished at all this year. And in my stupid rodent brain, I am thinking he's saving it for when it matters and the floodgates are going to open. I don't know if that's going to happen. He's still getting chances, but his shot doesn't have the accuracy and the zip it's had in the past. But I think once he gets one or a couple, he has a tendency to really get going. And I think he's the key to the series. If Matthews is Matthews, I don't think even a player as good as Barkov can stop him. And that's where it gets to a close series where they'll need that depth advantage to take care of the rest.
Yeah, the Panthers do also have their own version of, career low shooting percentage, but a
Mhm.
guy who once he scores, you kind of expect that to just open it up in Carter Verhaeghe. Obviously, not saying Verhaeghe is as good as Austin Matthews.
Yeah, same
No, he's
idea.
better.
Yeah. Look, I'll never forget like the first couple of years that we had Verhaeghe and his evolving hockey. The Rapham charts had him like comparable to Connor McDavid. I loved that. Was a very fun time in my life personally, as far as being a complete asshole on Twitter is concerned.
Wait, that's what you went with, and not the Nola Chari has more career hat tricks than
That was
Austin
TJ's
Matthews.
bit. That was TJ's bit.
That was still a great pick. I don't know if you were following us at that point, Dom, but we got so many Leafs fans upset with that one.
Is that true at one point?
Yeah, it was true.
Had hat tricks in consecutive games, and
Mhm.
Austin Matthews had not yet had a hat trick that season, I think, or maybe he only
Okay.
had one.
Yeah.
It was in like December of 2022 or so, and
That's a
people
good
thought we
troll
were
job.
using that as a very serious player comparison, and it made a lot of Leafs fans very upset.
Yeah, understandably they can be a sensitive bunch for sure. Matthews does not have a hat trick this year, by the way. If you want the fear of God in your eyes of Matthews scoring 3 consecutive hat tricks in game 1, 2, and 3, it's the floodgates. If they open,
Right.
it's time to worry. I honestly don't think you guys are even worried. You guys won last year, went to the cup final the year before. It's all gravy.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do think they can go back to back here.
Yeah.
I mean, the expectation and the hope is that the Panthers are going to at least be playing for Lord Stanley for a third straight time.
Mhm.
But what I can tell you as someone who is a long-suffering diehard fan of a mediocre franchise for the first 30 years of his life, or I guess the first 30 years of their existence, when you're on the other side of it, you can't be hurt anymore. So it's like, yeah, you're saying all these things and it's like, oh, fear of God. And I'm like, Dom, I'm kind of good. Like, I'm good. We won the cup last year. I cried like a baby. Like, I'm
Hmm.
good. Like, yeah, it would be disappointing to get knocked out by Toronto, especially after all the crap we've talked. And then, you know, all the memes of Toronto choking are all forever ended. But like, yeah, I'm good. Nothing can hurt me right now. Like, we could get swept in this series and it'd bother me for like 3 days. And then I just put on game 7 again and just be like, oh yeah, my life is different now. I'm not a fan of a
My
terrible
life is
franchise.
different now.
What's that feel like? I don't know.
It's the best feeling
You'd
ever.
have to be about 60 years old to know that feeling at this point, Tom.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't follow basketball, but we're like I've been so starved for a championship, and when the Raptors won in 2019, it was one of the greatest
yeah.
things I've ever witnessed. And I watch playoff basketball every once in a while. I'll definitely tune into the finals, but I'm not a basketball fan. That season when they got Kawhi at the start, I'm like, oh, we this might be different. This might be different. So I started paying attention a bit more, and then that run happened, and the bounce happened. And I remember round 3, we were all watching, and they were like huge underdogs against Milwaukee, and I'm like, we're betting all of it on the Raps, bro. They're down, we're betting, they're coming back, and it was the most fun. And I can only hope that the Leafs deliver that kind of joy at some point, because as fun it is to little brother the Sens, it's still the Sens. Like it'd be good to beat like a team that is actually good. And if the Leafs beat the Panthers, it would feel very, very sweet considering how fucking good this team is.
That's the world we live in now, Dom, is where the mighty Toronto Maple Leafs, with all their story, is, it would be a lifetime achievement for Leafs fans to knock off the lowly Florida Panthers. And like, again, this is why I can't be hurt anymore, is because for years we were the team that was like 5 points back with 2 games in hand and 2 weeks left in the regular season. And now we're the team that everyone wants to knock off, and it would make their season and make their year to be the team that finally defeats us. And I'm just like, yeah, this is it. This is life. I'm not gonna, let the potential negativity get to me.
What I really want is to make Brad Marchand know where he should have been. I need him to lose and then come here in the summer. All I want is Brad on my team. I love that man. I love to hate that man. But if he was a Leaf, I'm in line for a jersey the next day.
Brad Marchand's my all-time least favorite player. So it's been very
Not for the
conflicting for
last
him.
2 months, he isn't.
I still don't really like him.
Oh,
It's a hired mercenary.
I I empathize with that situations. I feel like this is like a therapy session of people wronged by Regina George. But you guys have Regina George on your team now.
Right. But we are the plastics now. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, we're the mean girls taking cheap shots, knocking players out of series. Everyone wants our players suspended. We're over the cap. We had a guy doing performance enhancing drugs. Like the
and then gets
Panthers.
we're
suspended
just all
again.
kinds of villain at this point, right?
Yeah,
Have they done the Bennett Marchand Kachuk line at all in the playoffs
Very
yet?
briefly.
Oh,
I believe in game 3, because that was the game that the Panthers were getting stomped and Paul Maurice shook up the lines a little bit and we got the full rat line for
what a
a very
cheek,
brief moment.
what a cheeky guy. Love that man.
Yeah.
I would bet a lot of money that we see that line a lot more frequently in this series.
I just
disagree.
can't imagine a more nightmarish line for Leafs fans who have been traumatized individually by Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett, and Brad Marchand
Yeah,
separately to see
yeah.
them on a line together.
I'm not gonna lie. I would never like I don't want him to get injured or anything, but if Matthew Nyes lays Sam Bennett out first shift, I will be very happy. Just like a nice thunderous clean check that puts him on his butt. Nothing to it,
Yeah.
just dust your hands. That's what I want to see. But yeah, it's gonna be a good series, I think.
And
By the way, just to circle back to a quick point, the goals for over the last 3 years, it is 5-1 in favor of Matthews on ice against
Mhm.
Barkov, with Matthews himself having 4 of those 5 goals.
That's what the Leafs like need in this series. That is that is the key to victory. I know that the coach said that it's not about the core four, it's about the team, but like
Yeah.
it has to be about the core four because they think they got 2 goals from forwards who were not in the core five now.
Right.
Depth will be a problem for the Leafs, but the way they play is not the most entertaining to watch. And I know some people are down on the Leafs because they don't control the puck the way they used to. And it's not an aesthetically pleasing way, but I do think that there is a method to the madness where they do seem to keep a lot of pucks to the outside. They contest a lot of shots, and I think that was effective against Ottawa. I don't know how effective it's going to be against Florida when they have all these weapons in the top nine, but I think they'll be an annoying team to play against. Lawton's line with Lorentz and Yarncrow have been the kings of making sure absolutely nothing happens when they're on the ice. They are complete time wasters in the best way possible, and that might be effective against one of the Panthers' middle six lines to take them out of the game, but it won't be something where the Leafs get anything out of it other
Yeah.
than making the other team not do anything.
Yeah, so that's the thing. We fondly refer to that as the Riley Nash School of hating hockey.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and Etu Luszczyszyn also an honors student at that school.
He Luszczyszyn, I think, might have one of the like strongest forward discrepancies for like offensive and defensive rating. He's
Yeah,
got a plus 2.4 defensive rating, which is like a really strong mark, especially for a third line forward. He's got a -5 offensive rating, which is like typical for a fourth liner.
right.
So it is usually when someone is that bad at offense, they're playing nothing minutes and they're not actually that good defensively. They're just playing minutes that like don't matter. Lusterinen is so strong defensively that like there's an actual needle moving impact to his methods of madness.
And that Lundell, Etu, and
Mhm.
Marchand line has just been so good. It was so excellent against Tampa. Um,
Yeah, 5 points for
that's
all of them. Not
right.
bad.
It's
Yeah,
it's going to be a hard line
cool.
to neutralize if you're Scott Lawton.
Yeah.
So one of the other major talking points of this series, I think, is that the Panthers are a very heavily penalized team. Uh, I pulled some deltas between the regular season and round one this morning just to look at some of that, and they're averaging about 4 minutes fewer at 5-on-5 during the playoffs than they did during the regular season. And Toronto has this very strong five forward unit. What do the Panthers need to look out for, during this second round series with that really strong Toronto power play? The Panthers penalty kill was excellent against Tampa, but it did admittedly struggle in general during the regular season. It was a pretty middling unit in terms of its success of killing penalties. So, how hard are the Leafs going to try to bait the Panthers into penalties and try to take advantage of that kill?
I don't think it matters. What I'll be watching for is Paul Maurice's fingers. How many is he holding up, and how will that affect the flow of the game? Because I don't know if you recall
Oh, we recall.
2023, how many penalties per game the Panthers averaged in the first, third, and fourth round, but it was around four. And in the second round, forget who they played, could be anyone, it was around two. And that includes, I think it was six in the first game. And then after that, the refs got completely worked by Maurice's antics, which
Yeah.
at this point I respect, but at that point it pissed me off that it worked that effectively. I don't think the Leafs do that much to actually
Hmm.
bait penalties, but could be a very different thing against an entire line of rats. It'll be interesting to see how that happens, but I would be a little worried about the five-man forward power play against Barkov and Reinhart, who love to create some offense of their own on the penalty kill. And Marner, as good as he is at QBing that power play unit,
Yeah.
he is not a defenseman. And if there's a rush, I don't think he knows what to do. And there's been a lot of dangerous chances that go the other way. Two of them went in for Ottawa in the first round, and that is part of the reason it went to six. But Florida presents a huge threat in that regard. So I do like what they do offensively. I think it's worth it, and it'll be a lot stronger than what you guys probably remember from the 2023 playoffs, where the Leafs power play was nightmare fuel for me. But yeah, I think that'll be definitely a key battle to watch, and I would definitely set the over/under on shorthanded goals at like 1.5. I think they're getting at least one in this series.
You're welcome for Paul Maurice making a 5 forward power play a thing that's allowed in the NHL, because every terrified coach just waits for someone else to do something bold,
Mhm.
and then everybody follows.
If
Mhm.
I'm not mistaken, the assistant coach that was on the Panthers bench that kind of led the charge on that went to Toronto. I don't remember his name.
McDonald?
Yes, I think so. And
Interesting.
I don't think he's still with the Leafs.
No, I think he only lasted a year.
Do you think we see a Panthers 5 forward power play?
No.
They haven't flirted with it at all.
Yeah.
I
They could very easily put Barkov on the point to run that. And
Mhm.
we've seen it every now and then in very sparing situations. But I doubt we see it at all in the playoffs. I think they really like what they've seen out of Seth Jones on the power play. And I think they really like what they've seen out of Nate Schmidt on the power play.
Mhm.
Ekblad will miss game one of this series, but towards the end of the series, I don't think he got any power play time in game three against Tampa, his first game back. But he did appear in game four on a couple of second unit shifts as the trigger man on the left half wall.
Mhm.
So I think they like their defensemen too much for what they bring to a power play. To really flirt too much with the risks of the 5 forward power play, even if you have reigning Selke Trophy winner and current Selke Trophy finalist Sasha Barkov on point.
I'd like to see it happen because they just have so many good forwards, but this is
Right.
also a team that refused to put Carter Verhaeghe on the power play for the longest time. So
Right.
they've always been a little quirky. I think the only way it happens is out of sheer desperation if
Yeah.
they are down big in the series. And even then it might be like a goalie pull situation. But how do we feel about Seth Jones? Because I feel like I recall you guys were a little concerned when they traded for him.
So Alex and TJ were a lot more concerned than I was.
Hmm.
Um, and I think even TJ's concern was more about the contract than
Yeah.
the actual player.
Hmm.
I was kind of all in at $7 million. There's a risk in trading for 5 years of a 30-year-old
Yeah.
at $7 million a year, and giving up your best goalie prospect to do it when your starter only has a year left on his contract. Like, obviously, there was a risk diagnostic done prior to making this trade. I've really enjoyed what Seth Jones has brought for the most part, and I think he was really good against Tampa in round one.
Hmm. Yeah. I I think it took a bit of time for him to
Yeah.
make things happen. That happens to a lot of traded players, and it wasn't a shock that it happened to Jones, but I was personally very excited for Florida for that trade because it seemed like Jones is exactly
Yeah.
the kind of player they needed to replace what Montour brought to the table last year. I know when people say teams need a defenseman, they always think of like a shutdown guy or a guy to stabilize a top four or whatever. And something that often gets missed is like genuine offensive play driving coming from
Right.
the top four. That is something the Leafs lack, and it's something the Panthers also lacked before getting Jones. Like as good as Forsling and Ekblad are, that's still just two guys who move the needle that way, and everyone else was kind of an offensive black hole. Jones completely changes the makeup of everything, and I think he's definitely been a misunderstood player throughout
Yeah.
his career. I think hockey men were a little too horny on his tools, and I think a lot of analytics people were a little flaccid on his numbers. And I think the right
Right.
answer was always right in the middle of that, where he was probably, even when his numbers were bad, like a very competent number two defenseman in a tough
Right.
situation.
Right. Like I know I don't need to go out on a limb to explain this to you, Dom,
Hmm.
but like, I Jones was much maligned because of that $9 million price tag.
Yeah.
People started looking at him as if he was a lot worse of a hockey player than he was because that contract was just so hefty. But
Yeah.
if you ignore the numbers, Seth Jones is still a completely serviceable right shot NHL defenseman that can make your top four better. The contract was always the issue.
Yeah. I think even serviceable is like does him a disservice because
Yeah.
they're like, and I'm not gonna exclude myself from this. I obviously went at Jones a lot in my earlier days, especially when I wasn't taking a full accounting of how important quality competition is.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of other analytics people still have a tendency to do that. And over the last like 2 months, I've been going through past version of my model and adding that adjustment that I added last year. And if you look at Jones, his trajectory is significantly more normal after you factor in how difficult his minutes were
Right.
every year. Because if you use some other models or even my old version of my model, there's all these like big jumps and they'll depend on how good the team around him was or
Right.
how difficult the minutes were, where when the team got bad, he was drowning in those minutes. And some models would have him as one of the worst defensemen in the league, and that was definitely a bridge too far.
Right.
But it was
Right.
also like if you have these numbers, you're probably not this number one elite guy that hockey men were thinking either. So I'm looking at his like trajectory now, and he has been considered by my model at least a solid top pair guy since at least 2017, every single year. And which is what he like, I think most reasonable people would think about him as well. And I think that is where like models should be. They shouldn't be so far out of whack that you think, what the hell is this? Why is this guy who everyone else thinks is good this bad? And all it happened a lot with defensemen, and my model was definitely guilty of that a lot in the past. But Jones was definitely, I think, the poster boy of that, where if you're watching him, you like the tools he has, you like what he brings to the table. He's just not well suited for the role he had. Now he's on the second pair on a good team, and lo and behold, he looks great.
Right. Exactly. Right. Like
Crazy.
that was the whole issue with especially
Yeah.
the last few years in Chicago was, he's playing 25 minutes a night with no help against other teams' top lines. Like it's gonna be really hard for anyone to look good in that situation.
Yeah, it's like the main question is like, what do you expect someone to look like
Right.
playing minutes that difficult? What would the best player in the world look like playing Jones' minutes? And obviously, their numbers are going to be better than Jones because they probably drive play more. But if you put a regular number two defenseman there and say, all right, you're the number one defenseman on one of the worst teams in the league, good luck.
Right.
That's basically what happened with Jones. And I think it's nice to see what he's capable of now that he's on the Panthers. And like I said, I was excited for the Panthers. The real emotion I felt was worry that the Leafs would have to get through the Panthers now that their top four looks a lot better.
So that's as good a time as any to transition to the final little piece here, which is, series X factor and prediction. So Dom, if you want to kick that off, uh, let us know what you think the big difference maker will be here, one way or the other, and how you think the series will end up going.
The X factor for me, I think, is Anthony Stolarz, who was the Panthers' backup last year, obviously.
Yep.
And per game, he was more effective than Bobrovsky last year. He was more effective than Bobrovsky
Yep.
this year in a bigger role. And it's very tricky to balance that between Bobrovsky's ability to do that while playing every other day. And I think sometimes that idea gets lost when you see 1A, 1B goalies thrive or backup goalies do better than you'd expect, is like, what do they look like playing a starter's workload? And so that is where I think Stolarz is the X factor in this series, because on talent alone, based on what he's doing per game, he can steal a series. He
Yep.
has that ability, and I think he can outduel Bobrovsky. But Bobrovsky has this playoff pedigree. Obviously, the last 2 years he's been incredible, and he had the Leafs number specifically in 2023 that it's not going to be an easy job. But if he can win that battle, that is a point in Toronto's favor of finding a way to defeat the almighty Panthers.
Yeah, it's definitely a come up for Anthony Stolarz in terms of
Hmm.
he's now done it 6 games in a row where he was playing every other night. I always say, if you like you were saying, if you got a 1A and 1B situation, why are you going to change it in the playoffs unless one of those goalies loses their game? But, it's only been one round, and, flashing neon signs, it was just Ottawa, but Stolarz looks like a capable number one goalie that, can get you through a playoffs And honestly, I'm happy for the guy. Like Toronto, Toronto had a very smart offseason where it was just every former Panther we can get that we can fit under the cap, we're just gonna sign them.
I'm not
Yeah.
convinced that this summer's not going to be similar, by the way. But that's probably a June 30th podcast, not a May 2nd podcast.
Yeah, all that hatred for Sam Bennett's gonna be very interesting for you guys on July 1st.
Won't be interesting for me. I will hate that contract the day it's signed.
Yeah,
I already know it's going to be bad.
yeah.
I I think the world of the Panthers front office, if they don't sign Sam Bennett, you should take that into consideration.
You know what? That's actually a great point. In Zito we trust and all, and if that means no Sam Bennett, then that's not Zito messing up. That's trust your GM that won you a Stanley Cup to continue making good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great point.
I have a question for you guys. I don't know if I've
Yeah.
asked this before, but when Carolina made all these great moves, everyone banged their fist and said, "Tall ski, tall ski, tall ski." Do you guys do that for Sonny?
Not. I think I did a bit with Seth Jones and some of the other
Hmm.
recent moves. Um, but I think in general we're more Zito, Zito, Zito.
Hmm.
But I also think that has a lot to do with the
Yeah.
optics in Carolina are very much that Eric Tulsky, you kind of know that he was the brains behind the operation all along. That's not really the
Yeah.
optics in Florida.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know, I think the world of Sonny, and I think
Yeah.
that I also think the world of Tulski as well. I think they're
Yeah,
both
me too.
very, very smart hockey people. I just think it's always funny the about the difference in the PR campaigns that they both get for
Yeah.
as AGMs for teams that make very strong decisions.
Yeah, I think it's as much about Zito being willing to listen to his
Hmm.
analytics guys and not because when he first got hired, he surrounded himself with a lot of hockey men that had us very concerned. But then the decisions he made clearly signified that he was listening to
Yeah.
everybody and putting a lot of weight on what his, analytics people were telling him, including Sonny. So,
Sonny, Sonny, Sonny.
Look, I'm on board for that.
yeah. Yeah, so I think that's just really a big part of it. I mean, outside of the Ben Sherratt move, like almost every
That's
decision Bill Zito's made, like you can see the analytical fingerprints all over it.
Even that one wasn't that bad at the time, given how he actually looked when he was on the Panthers, right? Like obviously, I think it was on the Habs. He had some awful numbers, and if you, what year was that?
that
2020?
That
was
was
the
the President's
President's Trophy
Trophy.
year, so 21-22.
Okay, yeah. So I had him as a number five that year.
Which
Uh,
this is also a price objection, but the issue with that is I don't want to give up a first round pick for number 5.
yeah, yeah. I remember the price of that being
Yep.
crazy, but I also remember being surprised at how effective he was in a Panthers uniform, much more than he was with the Canadians.
Right.
And I think when stuff like that happens is when you start like opening your eyes a bit on the quality competition stuff, because there's been a lot of defensemen where they look bad in a big role, they get a smaller role, and they look better.
Right.
That does not apply to Sherratt, who kept getting a big role in Detroit and has just gotten worse and worse every year. But
Right.
there are definitely a lot of other cases.
Well, Steve Eisman's the best team in the world.
I'm going to say my X factor for the series is going to be Anton Lundell and the at-large third line here. Uh, Under the assumption that these top sixes do kind of cancel each other out a little bit, it's going to be up to Anton Lundell to drive that difference-making third line
Mhm.
to lead the Panthers to victory in 5 games over Toronto in this series.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I think he'll eat Max Domi's lunch.
My X factor, and I'm just going to go off the board and go on completely on brand because we kind of already talked about it a little. Dom, you brought it up. I'm going to say
Mhm.
the X factor in this series is going to be how it's officiated. If
Anyone who's listened to this show for any length of time should not be the least bit surprised by Alex saying that the refs are the X factor.
but it's true though. Like if this series is called extremely tightly and they don't let the Panthers, kind of push their weight around, and it's a
One way
lot
to
of
put it.
it's a lot of power plays, it's going to favor the Leafs. If the Panthers are allowed to rough up the core four or the core five, as you now call it, Dom, if they're allowed
Yeah.
to play rough and play play hopscotch with the line, it greatly favors the Panthers. I think that's a very reasonable take.
Will the Panthers be allowed to be dicks? Is I think like a very crucial X factor.
Yeah,
And
that's fair.
I think it's fair.
Thank you.
I definitely during that series was losing my mind a bit. I've chilled out a little since then, and then seeing Ottawa's fans in game one lose their mind because Ottawa was playing very stupidly. And they got better as the series went on, but that first game was just hilariously bad in that regard. And then game two, they're like diving all over the place because they thought the Leafs were doing that. I don't, it was hilarious to watch. I hope reffing is not a story. I don't want it to, like, I don't need it to be tightly officiated. I just want there to be consistency where they get most of it.
I'm being serious now. Call penalties that are penalties. Don't decide the game with the whistle or swallowing a whistle. Because like that's the one thing I hate the most is where it's like, oh, it's the last 5 minutes of the game. We can't decide a game with a power play on a guy who was just tripped. Like if it's a penalty, it's a penalty.
Yeah.
Last question because we're way over time and you got to get back to watching you. Series prediction, Dom, and where is your entertainment purposes only money going? There we go.
I'm wondering if I should do a funny bit. Say Leafs in
Always
four.
do the funny bit. Always do the funny
Oh
bit.
yeah, Leafs in four. We're fine. We're fine. They're not taking one
There
from
it
us. No, I am going to say Leafs in seven. I think home ice will be a factor in the series. I think it'll be officiated okay. And I think this team is a little different. But most of all, law of averages. 2023 Leafs were favored and Panthers won. 2025 Panthers are favored. Time for the Leafs to win. That just makes perfect sense. Gambler's fallacy. I do think that the market is a little low on the Leafs right now. So my entertainment purposes money is on the Leafs. I know a lot of fans like to do the emotional hedge. I would never do that because I'm not a loser.
I hate that. I hate people who do that.
Yeah, especially podcast hosts who do it. TJ's not here to defend himself. This isn't fair.
The one thing I will say to your prediction, Dom, is homers who don't want to admit their team is going to lose always predict their team to win in seven.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dom, why don't you let the people know where they can find your work?
They can find me at The Athletic, where I have the Panthers favored. And if I use my brain, I would say Panthers in six, but I would never, ever in my life not pick my boys. And so it's Leafs in seven all day. We have a lot of series previews coming up over the weekend. Leafs and Panthers. I don't know when this podcast's going on. It might go up in the morning, so there'll be a series preview for you right there. And we talk a lot about how great the Panthers are and how lucky it would be for the Leafs to bask in their presence and maybe eke out a win.
That's some very high praise, and we appreciate that as well as your time. The last thing we want to thank you for is your squares, because those squares for the odds that you put out are extremely aesthetically pleasing.
Thank you.
And
I
easy
love
to
them
understand.
A lot.
They're so great.
I love my little Tetris chart. I feel like a couple years ago, I got some people who were confused by it, and when they get confused, they get angry. And I took it personally, but I've grown to understand that it doesn't matter if someone hates the Tetris chart. I love it. I think it's great. I think it's fun. And last year, I got to do a little video showing the progress through the playoffs that ended with the Panthers winning. I think that's why you like it, is you remember that video and you're like, this is fun.
I actually don't remember that video.
Yeah,
maybe subconsciously I'm thinking about it, but I just love the simplicity of here are 50 or 100 squares. Like here's a grid with a specific number of squares that makes a percentage case extremely clear and easy to understand.
Yeah. Your squares grow if you're good and you start winning, and if you lose, you lose your squares.
So Dom, thank you so much for your time. This will be up in the morning. Alex, where are they rating us 5 stars today? I didn't have enough time to think of a good bit for that today.
Wherever Jim Montgomery got this powder blue suit from, because it is Beautiful. And he is on another one today. If you guys have been watching the game while we're podcasting, he's calling out the Jets for diving and everything. It's been fantastic.
Amazing.
So we don't have the schedule for round 2 just yet, but rumor has it that game 1 will be on Monday. So we will see you on Monday for game 1. Good night, everybody, and go Panthers.